Well, I think they're very much still in the attack phase. They've really gone after the judge in the case. It's so interesting because he's a lifelong Republican and appointed by President Bush, recommended by Rick Santorum. And the proponents of intelligent design were rubbing their hands with glee when he was assigned to the case, thinking, you know, we have a real shot with this guy. He's one of us. Well, it didn't work out for them, and suddenly, now that the decision has come down, he's become a liberal activist judge, according to the same folks. I don't know that that's credible, but they've accused him of everything from plagiarism to copying the ACLU's briefs to calling a publicity hound and overreaching. Even one of the things they've criticized him for was for going too far in his opinion and saying intelligent design wasn't science. He should have just looked at the motives of the school board. That was enough. Well, the problem with that position is the entire defense of the school board was based on presentations that intelligent design is science. He had to rule on that. He was required to. He was invited to by both sides. So a lot of the criticism of the judge and his decision seems to me to not hold a lot of water, but that's, you know, I guess it's not unusual for the loser in a case, regardless of the side, to go on attack mode, and that's what's been happening. So I don't think the proponents of intelligent design have given up. Neither have the opponents of evolution in general. The more faith-based organizations are busily constructing creationist museums. There's one right in San Diego, the caveman riding a dinosaur on a saddle. You know, because the Earth is only 6,000 years old, and because the geologists are just wrong. And there's a whole alternative science that has evolved, as to use your apt term, to explain why the Grand Canyon was formed by Noah's flood. And the National Park Service is selling a book that explains how that happens. It's kind of controversial that they're doing that, but you could go into the park government-run store at the Grand Canyon and learn about the creationist origins of the Grand Canyon. So there's a strong constituency and a very vocal one for these ideas. A number of the presidential candidates that are lining up for 2008 are creationists or intelligent design supporters. Our own president has said that it should be taught in our schools, equally with evolution. So this may be a defeat, a tactical one, but I don't think the proponents of intelligent design are ready to give up, fold their tents. Yes?
I have two questions, one of which is, did you see the front page of the New York Times today? Yes or no?
Remind me.
There's a story, it's a very interesting story, and I kind of don't know what to make about it, of a guy who received his PhD in geosciences and paleontology from the University of Rhode Island. According to his advisors and so on, he did thoroughly solid, respectable paleontological work. He's also a young Earth creationist, and he just says, his words as quoted in the stories, these are two different paradigms, and I am able to work within one, I am able to believe in the other. You know, which is kind of, I was talking about it with someone today, I was saying, if you sort of regard science as a big game that doesn't really relate to the truth, but it's just, a way of assorting facts, I guess you can pull it off, but it seems very odd to me. So, I just thought that was...
It's fascinating, and it's got to be hard.
Yeah, I would think.
But I would compare it to some testimony that came in Dover. There was a biologist, a Brown University professor named Ken Miller. Actually, he's the author of the biology science book that was being used in the Dover High School, and that was its purchase was being held up by the school board until they could get intelligent design in. So Ken Miller comes in to testify, and he's a very outspoken advocate for evolutionary theory, and he says it's solid science, it's as well proven as any other theory in science. He's also practicing Roman Catholic. And he's not a young Earth creationist, but he was asked, well, so are you a creationist? Because he said, well, I also believe that God is the author of all things seen and unseen. So are you a creationist, the opposing attorney asked. And he says, well, I guess I am a small c creationist. Yeah, so he is, because he sees no conflict as well between matters of nature and science and matters of the spirit. One is the how questions, and the other is the why questions. And for him, that's also separate. A lot of scientists feel that way. They're church-going, or they're religious, or they go to temple, or whatever, and it's not an issue for them. And most churches, it's not an issue for them. The majority of American churches are not young Earth creationists in their philosophy either.
So if you wouldn't mind, and if other people wouldn't mind, I did have a second question, which is, it's one thing to say that the people who are against the teaching of evolution or for the creation of intelligent design are sort of motivated positively by their religious beliefs. I'm using positive in a certain sense there. But, there's a part of me that always senses there's more. There's resentment. There's, a number of things. And I've been thinking about this in particular because, and I think you mentioned objection to global warming nowadays. Now, global warming isn't stipulated one way or the other in the Bible. And, but I was just watching some of the congressional testimony on it recently, and from the big global warming report that was just released. And I guess there's this one senator who I believe headed the committee. He was the Republican who's the former head of the House. Biggest
hoax ever. DeWine, wasn't it? Like DeWine?
I think it was him. I don't remember the name being specified. Sort of at the end of this whole thing, he inserted into the proceedings his objections, and it's again the very very similar. It's kind of like, well, the scientific consensus is very large and broad, but I can name you this expert and this expert and this expert. And maybe these are totally disparate phenomena. The global warming and intelligent design,
Well, actually, I think there's a connection. One of the, let's bring in another idea. One of the disturbing things that came out during the Dover controversy was questions about the separation of church and state. Well, the majority of the Dover school board says that's a myth. There is no separation of church and state. Well, and then the underlying notion that was being advanced is that America is a Christian nation, and things should be taught that way because we're a Christian nation. Well, yes, we are a majority of people in America are Christians, but the Bill of Rights is not about protecting the majority's rights. It's about protecting the minority's rights. It's about making sure that the people who aren't part of the club also are protected, and that's the founding principle of our country. That to come here, you don't have to be indoctrinated into someone else's beliefs. And that is being lost when policies like those in Dover are advanced, because it was, in essence, to the people who objected to it, a very religious notion. It seems to me it's a very simple answer, that if you have a public school, it has to be strictly hew to a non-sectarian, non-religious approach to all subjects, and if you object to that, you have other options.
Yeah, but I would say, well, what's the commonality that you see?
Oh, well, okay, because this notion that science is somehow untrustworthy, because they're telling us lies, because they're godless, because they're atheistic. The critics will say. I would respond that science just doesn't deal with God. It doesn't mean it's opposing religion. Doesn't mean it's mistreating it or criticizing it. It just doesn't go there. But there's this feeling that by advancing ideas like evolution, science is attacking religion. It's contradicting God. And when that's repeated over and over again, when community leaders champion that view, then a distrust of science of all kinds begins to evolve. And you can see that, Americans are pursuing advanced science degrees at much lower rates than other developed nations are now. There's a big problem here, and it can affect everything from our global competitiveness to our national security, the well-being of our kids. Not evolutionary theory per se, but just attitudes about science or anti-scientific attitudes. And that's where I see the connection to the attitudes about global warming. Yes?
You raised a very interesting point about how most people's knowledge
Yes?
You raised a very interesting point about how most people's knowledge or lack of knowledge about evolution doesn't